Shalom, when the self souls, but giving no praise to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushua, Ba'ashem, Kakadash, double honors to the Apostle, Great Milson, and honors you brothers doing the work of the Most High in truth and in sincerity. Yahweh's real name, of whom the world ignorantly calls God Jehovah, Yahweh, his real name is Yahweh. The Son's true name is Yahweh Shai, and when we pray for Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushua, Ba meaning in, Ha meaning the, and Shah meaning names, Yahweh, in the name of Yahweh Shai. Real quick, so another clip that I'd found, which found interesting, but it's also just a thing of just like it's what we know already, right? The way that this system, this kingdom is set up, is basically designed against family, which is why you see, I forgot the term, TFR, total fertility rate plummeting, especially in countries that are Western aligned. Okay, but let me just play this real quick. And once again, it's things we already know, but let me just play it.
A lot of the problems that men have with their wives is fundamentally based on the fact that he's not her first choice, and
why is that? Right, because it's not. It was never designed such that one was to be with several hundreds of men, as you see nowadays, right? By the time a woman is in, her 20s, right? Especially if she went to university, she will have been well on the, on the carousel, right? What does it say? God abroad, right? Which is why that university, man, was, such a wicked act, right? And what did Esau do? Esau actively pushed for women in these sort of environments. And what do? You get the mess that you see on these campuses throughout the world, right? This is Sirach 25 and 25. Give the water no passage, neither a woman liberty to gad abroad. Right, when you're seeing, and what's another thing, all of these, women's holidays and this and a girls trip and all of that sort of stuff, right? Is one of the things that really leads and pushes all of this, right? This is Sirach 26 from 8. It's a drunken woman and the gather abroad causeth great anger, and she will not cover her own shame. The whoredom of a woman may be known in her haughty looks and eyelids. If thy daughter be shameless, keep her in straitly, lest she abuse herself through overmuch liberty. Right, and that's one of the things that Esau once again has really pushed out, is this, quote unquote liberation of women, whereas actually they're not designed that way. Right, in the kingdom, a woman, is basically gonna know one man her entire life. Right, we consider Israelites will go and live forever. Right, that means for eternity she will know one man. Okay. Not like this, where by the time she's, by the time you get her, right, you're like the 50th man, right? It's just wickedness, right? It says, verse 11, watch over an impudent eye and marvel not if she trespass against thee, right? She'll open her mouth, right, as a thirsty traveller when he hath found a fountain, and drink of every water near her. By every hedge will she sit down and open her quiver against every arrow, right? And you don't have to be that imaginative to identify what this is referring to. Okay, so let's jump back.
And the woman on some level doesn't accept that she couldn't win the more attractive man. She thinks that she's settling with the man that she got, but if she could do better,
and when you kind of see the interactions, you be out and about, you observing certain interactions, right? You can identify these things, right? And then it doesn't help that these men just basically fall into that as well, like by way of the of media, of basically like a woman always being angry at her husband. You're right, and you watch comedy, any of these like those comedians where their set is more like family oriented, or you speak about their family a lot, right? You always get the vibe, right, that she's in control, right? What do you think that does in the household, right? And once again, that type of comedy is by design. Okay,
would have. And there's like this memory of being with other types of men,
which is why it's completely wicked. Okay, because when you read the scriptures, right, you become one flesh, right? Let's grab this in Matthew. where is it? Matthew 9? Yeah, 19, right? Matthew 19 from verse 4 says, "And he answered and said unto them, Have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female?" Okay? It says, "And said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife." Right? Look at this word here, cleave, G4347, right? Proskolao, right? It says to glue, i.e. figuratively to adhere, cleave, join, to glue upon, right? To join oneself closely, right? Basically glue, become one, right? So basically shall, cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh, so that the two of them become one, right? So that's why, you've seen it. You may have been dealing with a chick, and at first, right, she didn't do certain things, but over a period of time, right, she started doing things like you do. I remember one chick, right, she didn't used to eat chicken, right, with her hands, right, as like chicken wings or whatever, but then after a period of time, she started eating chicken like the way I eat chicken, like chicken wings and stuff, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm getting all up in there now. Right, but as the title is, it was just my turn. Okay, and yeah, that's it. So when you're dealing with a woman, she starts kind of like laughing how you laugh. She starts, her kind of comedy kind of aligns to yours, right? All of these different things, right? But that's why is that? Because two are becoming one, right? She's basically becoming like you. Right, so that's why when you see all of this adultery, all of this wickedness that's going on in the world, it's it's really a Moism, right? Spirit so you think about those things and you really understand why it's it's something that is really frowned upon, right, according to our laws, and why the judgment for adultery is death. Right, because it is just pure wickedness. Okay, let me grab that. What was one in Proverbs? It's Proverbs 4. What does it say? Is it one and more two? Not true. Lack of understanding. Right. This is Proverbs 6. Right, so this is Proverbs 6 and 32. "But whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that doeth it destroyeth his own soul." Right, because you read, was it Deuteronomy the 22nd chapter, right, gives the breakdown on what happens, right, in cases of adultery, and that answer is death. Okay, you commit an adultery, whether if you take it and she's resisting, then that man's to be put to death. But if she's participating in both, it's supposed to be put to death, right, according to the law. Now, obviously, you can't enact that now, right? But it's one of those ones where the Most High sees, like the Most High sees, and you just wait for the Most High to, to do what He does, right? But let me read that again. "But whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that doeth it destroyeth his own soul." Right? "A wound and dishonor shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. For jealousy is the rage of a man, therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance." Right? So, but what has Esau done? He has basically pushed and glamorized adultery, right? Which really, when you just look into it, adultery is just hella Moism, man. Here it is, guys just gone into his woman and you sneaking in right behind. It's nastiness, man. Okay. So let's go on.
Or a fantasy that will never be fulfilled, that causes some measure of resentment, that if the woman is uninsightful, she can use that against her own husband or her own boyfriend, as if he were responsible for catering to her fantasies and expectations.
Right, and he goes into a Chris Rock clip, and I won't play it just because how YouTube is, right? But when you get the vibe, it is of the truth, right? You start dealing with women over a certain age, right? I'm getting a bit older now, right? And I'm observing it. You're looking at them, and it's like you can tell that they've either followed the career ladder. And then in the career ladder, been obviously they got urges, been fucking around, right, whilst trying to climb the career ladder, and then now realize that not all of the men were just around for a good time, not a long time, right? And then you can see the panic in their eyes. You can see, now they want to set rules and this, that, and the other. And it's just like, but wait there. All of these other men got to hit it for free, right? Now I got to pay, right? And then when you do pay, as this guy is going into, right, you're basically getting the worst of both worlds. You don't want to be there, right? And she's got all of this trauma, all of this baggage with her, right? So, that's why once again we're just aiming, for the kingdom, because this is all a mess. It is all a mess, man. Because when you look into how it used to be in the ancient world, right? It says in ancient Israel there wasn't I'll just get to the point, right? It's arranging a contract of marriage of a young girl with the undisputed prerogatives of a father in ancient Israel, right? Because contrary once again to Western belief, right, there is a hierarchy in the scriptures. You read that in 1 Corinthians 11th chapter, right, and the woman is at the bottom of that hierarchy, right? It weren't, it weren't about, but daddy, I love him, or whatever, what have you, right? It was about ultimately what the father wanted and what the father okayed. Okay, but when you watch these certain programs, they like to push this idea of romance. Okay, was a precept that was coming into my mind. Right, this is Numbers 30 from 3. Right, it said, if a woman also vow a vow unto the Lord and bind herself by a bond, being in her father's house in her youth, and her father hear her vow and her bond wherewith she hath bound her soul, right, and her father shall hold his peace, then all her vows shall stand, and every bond wherewith she hath bound her soul shall stand. But if her father disallow her in the day that he heareth it, not any of her vows or of her bonds wherewith she hath bound her soul shall stand, and the Lord Yahweh shall forgive her because her father disallowed it. Right, showing that the father was ultimately, in the position of authority over his daughters. Right, but it goes on to say the same also for the husband, right? Verse 6, and if she had told her husband when she vowed, or after the oath of her lips, or when she bound her soul, and her husband heard it and held his peace her in the day that he heard it, then her vows shall stand, and the bonds wherewith she bound her soul shall stand. Right, but if her husband disallowed her on the day that he heard it, then he shall make her vow which she vowed, and that which she uttered with the lips wherewith she bound her soul of none effect, and Yahweh shall forgive her. Okay, once again, just showing the hierarchy, right? But back to the point, right? So most girls were married before the age of 15, often at the start of puberty, right? Now you have people that will say, "Oh, but that's because people didn't live as long back then," right? Which is complete garbage, right? So when you look at what's this term? Life expectancy. Life expectancy is an average, right? So if you've got two children, right, one passes at birth and one dies at 70, the life expectancy of your children is 35, right? Because it's an average, right? And when you look into, I don't know about back in ancient Israel, but through history, at different points in history, I think it was like if a child passed the age of 10 years old, right, then they were actually likely to live to 70, right? But then also one of the things I found interesting, so I was just looking it up because when you look, I remember basically just some chick that that I was that I kind of knew, right? I posted something where she was at a wedding, right? It's Chinese chick, right? And like everyone in the crowd looked young, right? So I was just kind of was like, roughly what age do people get married throughout the world. Now obviously we know these ain't necessarily the correct numbers, right? Especially looking back at when some of these numbers were last published 1996. Damn, right? But we know women be getting married off a lot younger than this in the so-called African countries, right? But you see that the earliest is 19, right? And then allegedly Mauritius, right? You get 32, right? Which is rather interesting. But for the most part, by 26, 27, actually, it looks like most nations will have married off their children. Okay, this doesn't surprise me at all, right? But then you look at like in the Americas, Colombia, 18 years, and also one of the things as well here is like when you look at these numbers, obviously, they ain't gonna count the ones where it's like like a village wedding, right? So yeah, it's Colombia. You see all of these numbers here. You see the United States, 12 years. So between 18 in Colombia, right, and 30, right, in the United States, how much of the carousel will have these broads been riding within that time? Like, you just got to really think about that, okay? And then allegedly Chile is at 37, right? Which that's the thing with all of these things. It's all allegedly, right? But we know, at least in the Americas and in the UK, what we see, right? I just found it kind of interesting. And you see Nepal for Asia starting off at 20, right? And then also mainland China is like 25, 25, and then not being married by 30s is very frowned upon. From some of the stuff that I heard, right? That's just hearsay, right? And all the way down to 37 in South Korea, right? Europe. And what were we saying? It's like in the Western influence, right? All of this gets pushed all the way to the end. So, allegedly Russia, Moldova, 26, being the first, right? Age of first marriage. I don't know if I said that before. Right, United Kingdom, 29, right? Which tracks kind of what I see around about, right? And then apparently all the way up to 38 in Spain. Okay, so that's just how things have been flipped upside down, man. But it's real. You ain't her first, so don't treat her like she's your first. You're her first, right? You treat her like what she is, right? So yeah, I just thought that video was interesting. And once again, nothing we don't know. There was I think it was quite funny joking here, but I know it was a crowd, so you get ooh, but you know how YouTube is, so I won't play it. But yeah, as always, what I was there to find to the next time, session one.